Hi, everyone, and welcome to Backstage's interview series on lessons for people leaders. Today, we have the distinct privilege of being joined by Carolyn Cooley, a veteran in the HR and people leadership space who currently serves as the Chief People Officer of Bowery Farming. Carolyn, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Oh, thanks, Serena. I'm so glad to talk to you.
Great. So the main topic of this interview today will be on how to staff up your HR team. If you're somebody who's listening who is just getting started, or the ratio of HR team personnel to the rest of the company is a little bit out of whack. But first, to get started, let's discuss a little bit about your career story and give people a sense of who you are. So I'd love for you to tell me a bit about your journey to your current role. What brought you to Bowery Farming?
Oh, for sure. I'm happy to talk about it. Bowery, if people don't know, is an indoor farming company. And so what we're doing is using technology and science to deliver high quality, delicious produce that is free of pesticides and grown closer to the communities in which they're eating it. And so I first became interested in food when my kids were born, which is now almost 13 years ago, which is bananas. But like so many people, I think like I put everything in my own body. And then when I had kids, I was really worried about what they were eating and what was going into their bodies. And I started, reading lots of articles and watching documentaries and going down tons of rabbit holes about food. And that then, you start reading more and learning more about our food systems and what's in our foods and on our foods and food deserts and food scarcity and all these topics that started to become personally really interesting to me. And then we had the chance to live abroad twice. And I noticed how different the produce was where we were eating. And countries like Czechia, when I was living there was the Czech Republic, but now Czechia and Serbia, a lot of the produce is really farm to table, not because it's like cool and hip, but because that's the way the countries work. And it was just really eye-opening. The fruits and vegetables, they tasted amazing, but they went bad really fast, like overnight. And it was this flashback to when I was a child and before there were so many chemicals in and on our foods and so on. So I just got this passion around food, never thinking I was necessarily going to work in the industry, but just personally really interested in trying to make better decisions for myself and for my family. And then this opportunity came up at Bowery, and it felt like serendipitous, that you have this opportunity to work in a space where you're personally so passionate. And being in HR, I didn't necessarily think that I would have that opportunity to be at a company that was mission driven and in a space that I was so interested in and that I wanted to make an impact in. So it just, it was like, it felt perfect from the very start.
That's awesome. To have found a place that seems like such a strong natural fit for you.
Yeah, I'm very lucky.
So let's go back to the start of your career for a minute. What drew you to HR in the first place and made you think it was a good area for you to pursue?
Well, what's I think interesting is now this is like 25 years ago because I'm up there now. But I was a declared HR major as a freshman in college back when HR wasn't, a typical major that you could find at schools. And I was reading through the catalog for the school to, like apply and pick my major. And I came across HR, and it was this mix of business courses, things like accounting and business strategy and all the normal like business admin, along with a lot of psychology and sociology. And it talked about getting great business results through people. And it was like, this is perfect, this is exactly what I want to do. And so I declared the major. But it was a year later that I think I really realized that like this was the spot for me. And it happened during a summer. I was working for Kodak on the assembly line while in college. And, you're sitting there and you're doing the work. And this is a really diverse workforce, mostly, high school or less educated. And people were constantly saying they were going to take each other to HR. Like I'd be sitting there doing my work and someone would say, I'm going to HR on you. And the other person would say, I'm going to go to HR on you. And I was like, oh my gosh, am I going to be that? Like, is everybody going to be coming to me? I would be sitting in that room. And then I realized I wanted everybody to come to me. Like, I wanted to be part of making things better and making the workplace better and helping people to resolve their issues and designing better programs and experiences for people. And especially for those in operational roles, for hourly employees, because it was my feeling at the time. And then I think through experience has been validated that we don't spend enough time innovating and providing great experiences for those in hourly positions and in those operational roles. And so it became, like that was the moment that I was like, oh, I'm definitely going into the right space because this is exactly where I want to be.
That's awesome. Okay, so if you were to give like a very quick pitch to anybody who's considering a career in HR, either for the first time or a career switch, what would you say about why it's great and who you think it's a great fit for and who it might not be a great fit for?
Yeah, I do love this. I love this job. I love this function. And also I can say it's not for everyone. So I can answer that question. The things that I think are really unique to some of the things that are unique to the HR function or people function more broadly that attract me to it. I love to learn and I love to get involved in things. And I think there are very few roles similar to HR in which you can learn every part of the business. And in fact, you're expected to learn every part of the business because you can only do your job effectively if you really understand what the business needs. And if you're designing solutions that aren't just like random and like, I have an idea here and I have an idea there, but are instead directly related to the business's biggest problems that they're trying to solve. And so you have to get involved. And like, I can go into virtually any meeting, be like, I'm just here to learn, or I just wanted to understand what's happening here so that I can really help you think through that problem. And I'm like invited in with open arms. And that's been consistent at every single company that I've worked at. And I love that. I feel like I have a really deep understanding of many different businesses and industries. It's super cool. And that way it's never boring. I'm always learning. And I feel like I'm able to do like much better work as a result of it. And that feels rewarding, right? Like when you like create a great solution or do something or somebody says like, wow, you really get it. Like that feels great. So if you're someone who is intellectually curious, loves to learn, wants to get involved in all of these things and wants to design those kind of solutions, I think this could be like a really good fit. On the downside, where, I think it'd be hard, it's a bit of a lonely profession. We're oftentimes the things that we do that make the biggest impact can be behind the scenes. And so in that way, it could be a little thankless, like you do something and someone else, gets amazing credit and accolades for it. Which is fine with me. You have to be intrinsically motivated, I think, in this function to just like, I can pat myself on the back and be like, I did that, or I helped with that, or like we succeeded because of a role that I played and it feels good. And then on the flip side, sometimes we can get blamed for things that we weren't involved in at all. The number of times I hear the things that I've said or done that I had nothing to do with, is just like, it's just like hilarious. And I can let that just roll off of me. And, it doesn't bother me the same way. It might bother someone else. So like if, people are looking at this, there are so many positives and it's so rewarding. It also can be like a little lonely and a little hard at times. And so I think being intrinsically motivated and being okay with, not always getting like tons of credit, but knowing and being able to see the impact and being like, well, that feels good enough.
That certainly corroborates a lot of what I've heard from people in HR that I speak with all the time who are definitely fascinated with getting their hands dirty and understanding all parts of the business and have an intrinsic motivation, I would see to an extreme degree because it can be thankless at times.
Yeah.
So bit of a curveball question for you, but let's try it out. What kind of perspectives would you say HR could use more of in terms of, you think about the hiring pipeline for who's going to occupy really great HR roles. What sort of perspectives do you think are currently lacking that the field would really benefit from?
It's a good question. And I think that my brain goes to two places. First, I do think there's something really interesting about people who rotate through different functions and have, a different experience and a different lens to bring in. And I've tried to do that within my team. So while my entire career has been in the people function, I find a lot of value from people who come into the function because I think they bring a different perspective. So for example, I hired someone whose entire career was in supply chain,
Mm.
in their first role in the people function was on my team. And I hired another person who had been doing, had previously been like a merchant, a buyer at for a clothing chain. And then, again, first HR job was here at Bowery. And they just, think a little differently, look a little differently, whole different experiences. And I think that's really important. If you don't have that, I think you have to involve more employees and more voices into your work, getting feedback. But if you can bring that into your own team and get those perspectives, I think that's really valuable. But the other thing that comes to mind, and this I learned when I was working in gaming, I spent 2 years working for a video game company, mobile gaming in Serbia. Amazing experience. And I had the opportunity to take some courses on human-centered design while I was there, right alongside game designers and artists, and those that were, their entire careers were centered around designing hits for end users. And at first I was like, it was just another one of those things where I was like, I would like to learn, like, I'd like to learn more about their process and, the way that they think. But I found there were so many pieces that were so relevant to my own work and to my function. So I ended up getting, I think, so much more benefit out of it than I had expected. And that's that, when we think about the people function, and I'll say even specifically HR, throughout my career, there were so many times that people were like designing around an idea that was not human centered. And then they created like a really cumbersome process or solved a problem, sure, but it like was not the biggest problem. And it wasn't what was on people's mind. It wasn't what people were talking about, but they like took the easier problem to solve or the one that they knew how to solve, right? And so I think what's missing, like from a perspective, is like being really good designers. And I think human-centered design is like a great tool to leverage in that, where you're really thinking through your end users, where you're involving people with different perspectives. A lot of times we'll say like, you can't make everyone happy. And like, I do agree with that. Like, I know you can't make everyone happy, but human-centered design is about like understanding your extreme users and designing for, the spectrum. And I think we should challenge ourselves to try to make everyone happy, to try to design programs and processes that work from, your like most positive, most pro for the process to those that might be more skeptical of a tool or a process or a program as well. So I think we could use more great designers into the people function.
That's an awesome insight that I had never thought of before, but reminds me a lot of a product management role
Yeah.
where your ability to understand users sort of en masse is really important. And it sounds like you're saying similarly, except your customers are the employees at your company in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah, that's
Awesome.
exactly it. I think product managers, UX and UI designers, like there are
Mm.
so many tools, or even just like thinking about their mindset, and then applying that into the people function, which again, we can get that because we work in a function where we can actually get involved with folks in those fields, learn from them, and then apply it.
That's great. So you've had a number of roles in HR that you've already described a bit. How, in your perspective, has the field of HR changed since you started your career? And where in 10 years do you think or you hope it will continue to evolve towards?
Yeah, it's been it has changed a lot.
Hmm.
I've been doing this for over 20 years, and I joined HR at a time where I think it was a bit of an inflection point. HR was, and the people function was moving from a very administrative, tactical function that was almost a catch-all for things that managers didn't want to do, or just like straight up admin, to a function that could add real value and where people were accepting, where, you know, leaders were accepting that people were their number one most valuable asset, and that investing in people was important, and you wouldn't do enough or invest enough if it was just part of everyone's job. You needed teams of people strategically thinking about that. And so I feel lucky that I came in at a time where I think that was starting to build some momentum. But it hasn't been like a pure like uphill since then. I feel like it's been a bit of a roller coaster, and there have been times where I feel like the people function has been like on an upward and really valued, and there's lots of progress. And as a result, there's investments from companies, but also investments in the industry, you know, where you see technologies targeting the people space, and, you know, great forums and conferences, or, you know, all those kinds of things that I think help like move a function forward. And then there will be drops again. And so like the ones that come to mind most recently would be during COVID, where we all took on in the people team, I think, roles and, you know, wore hats that we had never, I could never anticipated the kinds of decisions I would be making, the things I would need to learn, the responsibility and the weight that I felt during that time. And I feel like the function was like very valuable at that time. I felt very valued. I feel like my CPO peers felt like so critical, and they were hearing from their teammates that they were so valuable, and we were getting lots of help and resources and energy around the people space. And then there's an economic downturn, and suddenly people teams are being laid off, and it's not nearly as critical as it was, you know, just a year or two ago. I like, if I fast forward, you said like 10 years from now, what would I hope is that we see, you know, like we're probably still going to see a little bit of up and down, but the swings are like more moderated, and that the people team has been, you know, elevated, and companies, even during tough times or in normal times, think that this is like a very valuable function, or and are investing in similar ways, and not allowing like external markets and swings to dictate how much importance you put on the value of your people.
Nice. So consistent investment in the people function, more consistent over the next 10 years.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay. And then finally, before we switch gears a bit, what career advice do you have for somebody about how to become an effective chief people officer at their dream company, which it sounds like you are today?
Yeah, and I am. This one's a really interesting one, because I've been so lucky to work with 3 incredible founder and CEOs at 3 incredible companies. And so I actually get asked a version of this question often, because people are trying to crack the code, right? Like, I think if you are lucky enough to work with really amazing leaders doing work that you love at companies that you're really enjoying, who have great cultures, people are like, how did you do that? And how could I do that? So I do get this question pretty often, and I've spent time trying to unpack it and figure out like, how did it work and how did I get so lucky? And I think a big part of it comes down to, if you're a CPO, you're going to be working extremely closely with the founder and CEO typically, or it might be a, you know, not a founder and CEO, but just a CEO. But you're going to be working with that person, and how you work with them is likely to dictate like how you feel about this dream job and this dream company, and if you're able to make it everything that you were hoping to. So when I talk to my CPO peers, I talk about that relationship with the CEO and how important it is to vet that during the hiring process, that nothing will be more important than understanding how you'll work together and the values that you have. And when I talk about the fact that I've been so lucky, I think part of that is because I have shared values with those 3 founders and CEOs. Like, if you looked at their list of top values and my list of top values, you're going to find tons of overlap and probably zero conflict. If not overlap, there would be nothing on their list I would say like, well, that doesn't engage me, excite me, or drive me. And likewise, I think that they would see, you know, the things that drive me and the things that I value most will be things that they would be on board for, and that they would want to make decisions with as well. I think if you have that at the core, you're likely going to have like a better working relationship. And so if I think about my relationship with Irving Fain, who's the founder and CEO at Bowery, who I've now been working with for 4.5 years. So the longest that I worked with any boss ever in my career. And I love working with Irving. And I think people from the outside might believe that we always agree. And that cannot be further from the truth. We actually think very differently. And we disagree a lot and on a lot of things. And I smile and I laugh when I say that because I love it. Like we're in it and we brainstorm and we talk through problems and we always end up in a better place with a great, outcome. We can talk openly and respectfully, but we can disagree and push on each other. And I think part of that is because at the core, we have like total alignment on what we're trying to build, how we're trying to build it, the way we want it to feel to work at Bowery, the kinds of people that we want to bring into Bowery. And so we might have different opinions about how you get that done, but we are like so closely aligned on the end result. And the way that we interact with one another, right? It's respectful, it's fun, it's, like we have a similar sense of humor, all those kinds of things that help. So like if someone's looking for the dream job, one, I think like if you can find something you're passionate about, I talked about my story of like, Bowery being a personal passion. And I think like that can be a big part of finding your dream job. But in our role specifically, working at a company that you're passionate about is not enough because so much of our day-to-day and our success is wrapped up in that relationship with the CEO. And whether or not you're going to have support for the things that you think are most important, whether or not you're going to be able to work through things, whether you'll be included in big decisions so that you can help with change management or the hires or whatever it is on the front end, rather than trying to play catch up in the back end, and those kinds of things. So I think finding that, the dream job has to be the mix of a company that you're in, a product or industry that you're so excited about, and a CEO and founder that you can really work effectively with.
It's a really helpful tip to point out that the day-to-day work is going to be shoulder to shoulder with the CEO and potentially other members of the executive team. And so to really make sure there's a fit there so that your day-to-day life is, motivating and charges you up rather than depletes you.
Yeah, I've talked with CPO peers, and I'm sure you've probably heard this as well, because I know you're talking with a lot of folks in the CPO role, and they, sometimes they'll tell me after the fact that they joined the company with sort of like rose-colored glasses because they were so excited about what the company does. And that didn't change once they were there, but it was so difficult to accomplish any of the things that they wanted to or were tasked to because of, friction within the organization. And so I think looking at both will give you a better chance to land the dream job.
Yep, totally. So shifting gears into the day-to-day work and more about that. So tell us a little bit about your role at Bowery Farming in terms of what you're responsible for.
I always break this into 3 things, and I think this is probably true for anyone or most people at a C level. The first part of my role is that I'm a member of the company leadership team. So collectively, we're responsible for the direction of the company and all major business decisions. Of course, if it's a decision around marketing or something like that, the primary decision maker is going to be, a company CMO, or if it's, a financial decision, it might be the CFO. But so many decisions are interconnected, and the overall direction of the company is certainly interconnected. And so we're working through that constantly. And I bring, of course, the people lens to it, but play that role on the company leadership team. The second piece is that I lead the people team. So everything related to the people function, from hiring and onboarding and talent management, compensation, benefits, programming and events, DEI. I probably missed something. I may have repeated some things, but the whole spectrum of the people function falls under my purview. So, leading that team, developing that team, and kind of leading the people strategy for the entire company would be number 2. And then the third piece is that HR partnership to the CEO, which is so critical because on the highest level when you're thinking about people related decisions or just business decisions and how we would want to pull that through to the impact to our people, I'm involved in those. And so having that, really close partnership with the CEO is kind of the third role.
Great. Very clear. And I think also instructive for a lot of people who might only be seeing parts of that, or who have that role at another company, but it might feel different, and they might be very new in that role. Can you paint? Okay, so you've been at Bowery for 4 years and a bit. Can you paint a quick picture of the biggest initiatives that you have undertaken since you started there, and then which one you're most proud of?
Yeah. When I joined Bowery, I would define it or describe it as pretty much like a full build. The company had, I think, about 60 people when I joined, and a lot of things were outsourced, kind of, cobbled together, like very typical startup. It was, hey, can you come in and do everything? And I was like, yeah, okay, I could come in and do everything. And so the first, I'll say like 18 months or so, were sort of like, for lack of better terms, like boring. The work wasn't boring, but like if I shared with you the things that we did at the beginning, it's like all foundational things. Because you have to pay people correctly and you have to have the system so that you can scale. So it was like implementing HRISs and ATSs and hiring my team and setting up, processes like background checks and compliance things and all of that. And it is not glamorous. And I think like a lot of, CPOs or heads of people, if they are in earlier stage companies, the first things that you love to go and be like, oh, this is such a cool company, I'm going to go there and innovate. But you can't really innovate until you've put the foundation in place. So that was the first step, was putting the foundation. And then these last few years have been super cool because you still have to you get a little crack in the foundation and you have to correct, something kind of major, but you really get to start innovating and doing exciting work. And so a couple of the things, I know you said the one, but it's always hard to pick. A couple of the things that I really am proud of. First, on the compensation side, one of my personal passions is helping to drive out pay inequity and trying to create processes on the compensation side that mitigate some of the risks that you could have for paying people improperly. And like, as you can imagine, I worked at big companies and lots of things were like behind the scenes, and it was just always shocking, what you would see. And even for myself, the first time I started managing people, and then they all made more than me. And I was like, wow, that's interesting. I just got promoted into this role and everybody was making more than me and they still all make more than me. And I'm like, how's that work? Am I not more valuable now than them? And, like all these things to unpack. So trying to right some of the wrongs of, legacy structures. So at Bowery, we have things like no negotiations, fixed pay points, non-overlapping pay bands. None of those things were things that I saw at like the big companies I worked at. None of the programs we have are identical to any other place that I worked, though I picked out some things and tried some things in other places that I've now evolved into what we do at Bowery. So really proud of those things. They're not easy, and they're obviously much simpler to do at a small company than at a big company, but I think all of them could be applied at larger at scale companies. So I love those. We've innovated in hiring in a lot of different ways. One of my favorite things that the team did here is we started our own podcast. So we have a podcast called The Roots, and it's a twist on job descriptions. So instead of just having your basic job description, I think is really hard to like get a real feel for the culture of the company or the like ins and outs of the job. We have a podcast where people can listen in and hear about not just the roles, but the people at Bowery and the culture of Bowery, and get a real feel for it. And so our candidates have given us amazing feedback on the podcast and love it. It's called The Roots, if anybody wants to listen to it. So really, really proud on that. And then there's all sorts of little things. Like I think when people hear innovation, at least for me, I used to think I had to go big. Like I had to create something totally brand new. Like The Roots would be an example. I had not heard of anyone doing podcasts instead of, just standard job descriptions and launching a people podcast and that kind of thing. So that was brand new when we did it. But not everything has to be like that. I think just finding places where you can tweak kind of like tried and true programs to make them customized for yourself and for your organization. So like for us, we have a mentoring program as an example. It runs in 6-month increments. We do matched pairings where we take a lot of time and energy to make sure that people are getting the things that they said they wanted out of the mentorship. And then on top, so that's, somewhat innovative that I think a lot of times just like, oh, you should, spend time with so-and-so or, whatever it is. So-and-so volunteered and this person too. So match up, we're more intentional than that. But also we do skill shares and social events between the mentors and the mentees and like a bunch of programming that takes a program that many companies do it. Probably almost all companies have some form of mentoring, but it makes it special, innovative, and I think more effective because of the tweaks that we make.
Awesome. One of the things that's, I think, very unique about the perspective you can offer to listeners is, in addition to your enthusiasm and just your innovation that you bring to the role itself, is that you've had a perspective into large companies as well as small companies and how HR should look at a certain size and how HR should look at a much smaller size. So I'm curious, could you walk through a bit about what the core functions that HR needs to serve at different life stages? What does it not need to be doing and what does it need to be doing in the very beginning? And then how does it evolve over time? Just a quick snapshot on that.
Yeah, I think that this might go back a little to something I said a minute ago, where you have to do those foundational pieces first. And I have heard of some CPOs, coming in and hiring specialists. Like, for example, they'll say, I need an L&D person, I need a compensation person, I need a benefits person, and so on. And before you know it, they've kind of used up all their headcount or resources that they have with people who are very specialized. And I go a different path. I say, we have a lot of work to get done and I need utility players. I need generalists, folks who can jump into these different places and flex based on what we need over time to deliver, all the foundational programs at the beginning. So I tend to focus on, hiring, of course, if you have a headquarters or an office, you likely need like an office manager or events manager. We call it people experience, somebody that can do events and office management. I think that's really important because you have to do the basics of that very well. And then it's about recruiters and generalists. So recruiters, however many recruiters are needed to, size the organization for the next period of time, because outsourcing that is extremely expensive. And so there's a really strong business case people can make for insourcing recruiting if any sort of growth is happening. And then the last piece is, those HR generalists. So those folks, for me, in my experience, if you hire a great generalist, an HR partner, they can do everything from, of course, employee relations and partnering with managers, but they also can start to develop learning and development programs. They can be my right hand when it comes to compensation and benefits. They can, help design talent management programs because they have seen them, throughout their career and help to administer them and so on. So that's been my strategy, to focus less on specialists at the beginning, more on generalists. And then as you grow, and there really is a need for someone full time to be focused in a certain space, that's when I would start, adding in some specialists, and you might hire someone fully focused on L&D or DEI or compensation or benefits, those kinds of things.
Got it. Okay. So start with a lean team of generalists who can cover a lot of the core functions and specialties, but in-house. And then over time, begin to hire specialist players who can go deep on core aspects of the people function.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that's driven by, where the company is at that time. Like, I will also say, there's no real playbook for this, because I'm saying that, and Bowery right now is in the US only. But if we were an international company that was the same size of people, but in 30 different countries, I might say, well, gosh, I need a compensation expert, because I can't possibly do that on my own, or even just through, having some consultants, because the complexity of having, only 500 people, but having those 500 people in 30 different countries and needing to know how I, compensate them appropriately, I might go down a different path. So I would also say, like, never being rigid. I do think generally, like, starting out with generalists is important, but you have to know your workforce, your business strategy, your growth plans. And so you might have to tweak that for sure, and hire some specialists along the way.
Great. And do you think in terms of ratios at all, in terms of like number of HR team members to relative size of revenue or headcount or managerial headcount, anything like that? Is there not a playbook, but guidance on that you could give people?
I, you know, I sort of don't, though I have lots of discussions about ratios. I think that particularly if a company is in early stage,
Mhm,
I think talking on ratios is like a waste of time.
mhm,
Um, that said, I worked at, several big companies. I worked at Honeywell, PepsiCo, Amazon. Jet was acquired by Walmart, so I was at Walmart for a period of time. And though when you're in these big established companies, and each one of those is also global companies with shared services, and Pepsi was around over 100 years when I joined, right? So you've got established processes and programs. Like, they're not writing policies for the first time. They're not establishing compensation systems. They're
mhm,
not putting in their first HRIS or ATS. In those cases, understanding ratios, I think, can be helpful. And I had heard things like 1 to 200 or 1 to 300. And, are those right, wrong, heavy, light? I don't know. I had a really interesting conversation with a former CHRO of one of the world's biggest tech companies a couple weeks ago. And it was enlightening because she said when she took over, she had the people team was 10% of the workforce at this big global tech company.
mm,
And so that's a 1 to 10 ratio, right? And her thing that she was saying was how ridiculously small and under resourced that was. And how the first thing she did was go to the CEO and say, how can you say that people are our number one asset? And we are only 10% of the workforce that is developing the programs and the experiences to find, keep, retain those people. And that was like mind blowing because I'd never heard anyone say 1 to 10 is, not enough when I was growing up in companies that were 1 to 200 or 1 to 300. So anyway, that I think shattered this idea of ratios for me. What I have realized is whether you're designing things for 50 people or 5,000 or 50,000, it takes time
mm,
and energy and resources to design that. So if I'm going to design a compensation system for Bowery, it's not like because only 50 people are using it, suddenly it takes me only an hour to design a compensation system. Or if I'm going to run a compensation analysis for Bowery, it's not going to take so much less time because we have fewer people, because you still have 50 different job codes and different scales and different places in the country and so on. So I think sometimes where like a CEO or a CFO or those who are making some of those decisions on, or helping to make some of those decisions on the size of a people team, might get wrong, is that they assume small company means a lot less work, and those bodies of work are not at all ratio based, right? Like, the only things that you could possibly say are ratio based are things like employee relations, some compliance pieces, how close you want an HR partner to be coaching managers and helping them to manage alongside. But a lot of the other things like have to get done no matter how many employees you have.
hmm. I think that's a really good, um, it's a useful insight for people who sounds like there is not really a playbook, but you need to have enough people and enough resources to do the work that the company requires at a given stage.
Yeah.
Uh, okay, so do you have any advice on when in a company's life cycle they need to hire their first real executive in an HR role, chief people officer or you know executive vice president, something like that?
Sooner than they think. I think, like,
Okay,
the one thing that I hear, and I'll talk with different founders and CEOs. Sometimes, we'll have shared investors, and then one of the members of our board, as an example, like, will contact me and say, "Hey, would you mind talking with this person? They're thinking, they're building out their team, and they think they're going to hire a very junior, person in the people space to start. And I just think it would be helpful if you would talk to them for, a couple minutes and share some perspective." And I think that anyone who does that, I think, regrets it. And actually, Irving, has talked to me about that. Irving is a multiple time founder. And he said, I waited too long in my first company. It's like, I probably waited too long in my second company too. It's always, something typically happens that causes the founder, the CEO, and possibly the executive team at the time to say like, oh, we should like get a peer in here. Whereas before they might have had someone that was, several levels of experience below. So my suggestion to people would be like, it's sooner than you think. And it probably depends on the vision that you have for the company. If you're out hiring like a very legitimate, experienced executive CMO, why are you out hiring a very experienced, legitimate CPO, right? Like what is, what's so much more important to your business about the financial stability or the marketing strategy or the operational piece of the business than your people, which almost every founder and CEO says is the most important part of their business. So I would say earlier than they think. When that is, I don't exactly know, but I know of some founders more recently that it was in their first 5 hires. And I think that's incredible, that right from the start, they're trying to invest in the people strategy. And instead of constantly doing we're building the plane while we're flying it, to try to, build some of those foundational pieces first.
Wow. That's really in there is a lesson for people leaders as well as CEOs or the founding team of a company to really be thinking about investing in a senior hire for the HR function early on. Which, yeah, it's interesting. I would say the field is sort of in transition because it doesn't always occur to founders to do exactly that. Like you said, they kind of intuit when they need a senior marketer or a senior salesperson or a CRO. But when it comes to things related to HR, it seems like there's a lot of confusion and people do hire junior people and put a lot of work on their plates. I talked to some of these folks and they're like, oh, I got a lot I've got to get done. And I've actually never done any of this before.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. And oftentimes those folks come from recruiting because the company is growing. And so the executive team at the time will say like, well, let's get somebody who's really strong in recruiting and they can kind of take over the people space. And sometimes that works. Like, I'm not saying it's never worked before, but the people space is extremely broad. And so taking someone who again is kind of that specialist and putting them over an entire people function, I think is really challenging. And I think people are better served to look for folks that have that breadth of skill set and that experience level. So kind of like both like T-shaped, deeply experienced and broadly experienced, right from the start.
That's great. I guess going back to the anecdote you shared about the person at a really large company with a 1-to-10 ratio who thought that was way off because there were not nearly enough HR leaders to support the organization. How would you help and advise HR people who are sitting as a team of 1 or a team of 3 for a company that has huge ambitions and a lot of work it needs to do on the HR side of things to make the case for more headcount or budget for resources? If it's really them who are trying to make that case internally. And then the question right after that is going to be, what's the case that you would make to a CEO or an executive team to tell them it's really important to invest early in HR leadership?
Yeah. So the first thing I would say is, in an ideal world, you would do that even before you get hired, right? Like, I think that that's about contracting and setting expectations at the very beginning. And so if someone's sitting there and found themselves in that position, I'll give some advice on what you can do now. But I think the best advice I can give is, if you're joining a company to be the head of people, VP of people, CPO, those are conversations to really have before you've even started, so that you know what the vision and expectations are from, I would assume, the CEO and founder when it comes to the culture and the people space and the growth plan. And then you're feeding back to that person what you think you will need at different stages of growth in order to deliver on that, and making sure there's alignment. Because I've seen it too many times that people think that they're aligned, but they haven't been kind of tactical in that discussion. And then they're very disconnected and they end up in the situation that you're mentioning, which is, we want to double, triple, quadruple. We want to be 5,000 people in 5 years. You have 3 people to do it, and it's like, it's just not possible. So if you find yourself in that position, I still think you can kind of work backwards and lay out the roadmap, right? What is the work that needs to be done? How many resources are needed? And be solution oriented, right? Everything doesn't have to be done in-house. There's possibilities of contracting and outsourcing different things if headcount, isn't a possibility. But I will say, you can usually in that also show the business case that is far more expensive than bringing those resources in-house, particularly if a company is growing, because you'll probably need those resources, into the long term. But I think outlining that roadmap is really important. And the second piece that I found, because my team wasn't always very large at Bowery, I had started out with outlining, based on that vision and the expectations, a team of me, plus I think it was 6 to 7 that I said that I felt I would need to, in the first 12 to 18 months, build the foundational programs and set up the roadmap. And as I got going, and I started delivering, and we started delivering even a little faster than we thought we could. So we started taking on, different things and starting to innovate a bit. I can remember sitting down and the CEO was there and the CFO was there, and they were like, well, what could you do if we gave you more? And I was like, oh, now we're talking. I could do so much. Let me show you. And that's when it gets really exciting, right? When you can start resourcing and putting investments into the people space, whether it's people or technologies, whatever, however you use that investment. But that came through delivery. That came from being clear about what I could deliver on what timeline and understanding the space. I think if you are just one of those people that are like, I need more people, it's like, but to what end? Like, what are we going to deliver, or what risks are we going to mitigate? I think you have to really understand your space. Like, a marketer wouldn't just be able to I need $2 million. Nobody's gonna be like, great, that sounds awesome. But if that person is able to show what they're going to get from that, then they're, very likely to be able to achieve that budget. So I think we have to have that business mindset the same way. And, people talk about the business case, but that's what it is. You have to be able to deliver on your commitments. You have to be able to articulate what you need and what you'll be able to achieve. And then you actually have to do it. You have to hit your timelines. The more credibility that you build that way, the more likely you are to be able to get the resources you need when you need them. So that'd be my recommendation. And then I think you asked one other part of the question. Now it's escaping my mind.
It's
It was how you get people to invest faster earlier. Is that right?
It's if you're talking to the executives who need to make that decision.
Yeah, I really do think it's tying it back to the business, right?
Mm-hmm.
Getting alignment. I'm also a big fan of outlining different options. I think that, great strategic thinkers think through multiple ways to solve the problem. So I've never said I cannot do that if I don't have more heads, because I do believe that I can probably get everything accomplished, but the timeline will be different, or the way that I would accomplish it, or the quality level, or whether or not it's tech enabled or manual might be different, right? So everything is possible. And so if you're just somebody who's like, well, I can't do it, or it's not possible, I think that you're not demonstrating your strategic thinking and your partnership and saying I can do this. Here are the different ways. This is the one I recommend, and this is the investment I would need to go down this path. But if you just kind of get a block and say it's just not possible, I think that that's not showing partnership. And I think that, business leaders are problem solvers, people that can figure out, different pathways to get it done and have thought through the pros and cons of, different alternatives.
I really like the advice in there about saying, you got to give a number of different options. And if it turns out that you are the only person, or you're going to try to execute on something ambitious with just a few people, that the thing that changes is going to be the timeline, and to really set expectations around that.
Yep, I agree.
This has been such a helpful and specific conversation around how to think about building an HR team, what goes into building an HR team, for people who are orienting it to it from different places. I wanted to close out by asking you one final question, zoom out a bit, which is, in your career so far, have there been any role models that you've looked up to? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
The answer is yes. There have been so many people that have shaped my career and helped me along the way. Like, I don't think you have a career. I can't believe it's been over 20 years, but I don't think you get to, careers over 20 years and get to sit in the CPO seat without learning from so many different leaders. And that's both folks in the people function. And also I've had like amazing teachers and mentors in other places. Like, my understanding of the finances of different businesses comes from amazing mentors and people that were willing to teach me from the financial function. And my understanding of operations comes from great operational leaders and so on. So yeah, like I think that asking great questions, asking people to spend time, being generous with your own time, because I think that's part of the give and take that comes from that. But yeah, like there's no like magic. It's, hundreds of people over an entire career that have just been so generous with their time and with their wisdom to help me, get where I am.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you for being so generous with your time and your wisdom today. It has been a really helpful conversation, and I look forward to other people being able to listen and take advice from you. So thanks so much, Carolyn.
Yeah, you're so welcome. Thank you, Serena. I love what you're doing and love listening to these sessions.
Great. Bye.